Bloody Pen Podcast.
What's going on, everybody? How's it going out there in
Scrabbler Town?
It's your mayor, Joe Vallon, checking in with you. We are going to be reading my book, Unkillable, Joe, here on the YouTubes, okay? And I'm just going to read it chapter at a time. I'm not going to go crazy with the editing. I mean, I want you to picture this more like I'm reading you a bedtime story.
If you really, really like it, go buy it on Amazon.
It's 99 cents, Kindle version. There's paperback available. I have to own it. It's got a gorgeous cover. It's a really cool book. It's written by your boy. Why wouldn't you buy it? I don't make that much on it on each particular sale, so individual sale. Anyway, okay, so here we go. Today I'm going to be reading the foreword to Unkillable Joe, and we're going to be putting these up in chapter segments, okay? So today we're just reading the foreword. Now, I want you to know that in my new book, there is no foreword. I kind of don't plan on writing forewords anymore. It's not really a thing of mine. However, this was my first book, and I did want to be clear about where I was coming from and maybe why it was so rough around the edges at the time. A lot of the writing in this book, I think, could be done better by now. I've certainly grown as a writer. I've put in a lot of training. That being said, it's a great story, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. So, okay, get yourself tucked in. Let's go ahead. Let's read my book, Unkillable Joe. Let's get some water and try to get through this in one read-through if we're lucky. So, cover. Unkillable Joe. Handsome cover. Looking good. Kudos to my manager and lady friend Lily for her cover design. She crushed it. And I've written in this one, this is my copy, to me, good job, Joe Vallon. Okay. Unkillable Joe, by myself, by Joe Vallon. Okay, we got our foreword, chapter titles, table of contents, my inscription in the beginning, and here we go.
Foreword.
I started writing Unkillable Joe in the spring of 2017. A horrible year for me. Actually, most of my years on this rock have been pretty awful, all things considered. I'm always hesitant to use the phrase suicide survivor, as it implies a well-fought victory over some unseen foe. Ever since I was a little boy, I felt the hand of finality resting on my shoulder. In retrospect, I should have been excited to enter this wonderful world, rather than being so fixated on leaving it. Everything seemed to be more effort than it was worth. Above all things, I've always craved the silent black sleep of the nothing beyond, or maybe just a break from the constant noise. Hang on. The song that's playing is all wrong for this. It should be sadder. There we go. Nice and mopey. Where was I? Oh, right. I was a sad sack of a human for some time, but I wore the mask of a class clown to cover up my inherent shame. If I was an honest man, I'd tell you that I truly detest most things. So, as is natural with anyone who hates the sight of their own face, I've lived several lives in pursuit of the one I might loathe the least. Willing to accept any fate but one splashed with the tacky perfume of normalcy, I sought out the darkest and lowest of places. I've rubbed shoulders with the very worst of humanity and lain next to goddesses. These knuckles wear the scars of my many adventures, and I'm intimate with the sensation from both ends of the knife. This tired body has imbibed enough booze to drown out a small town, and has taken in enough narcotics to revive a mummified pharaoh. From the back of a howling Harley-Davidson, I cheated death more times than Grimm would care to admit, and my name is spoken in circles that would otherwise have nothing to do with each other. In short, I've ripped shit up. My story has been a rough and tumble romp through poverty, violence, sex, and everything in between. All shades of awful and or interesting are represented in my gaze. Yet, with every life traversed and each face discarded, my eyes alone remain the constant. They may fade from their usual jade green to a more honest blue-gray, but since they've witnessed each aspect of the ride, I cannot fool them. I left the armpit of South Florida like a demon chased from hell. I abandoned my precious bike, my girl, and my family, in the hopes of outrunning the tsunami of truth I knew would eventually come crashing down atop my head. The odds of total disaster increased with each moment I lingered, so I tossed $500 at the mechanically ignorant dominatrix I was rooming with at the time, in exchange for her dented-up Crown Victoria, and drove it at top speed until at last I smacked headfirst into the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. I figured if I wanted to keep myself from sinking any further, then elevation was the simplest answer. I spent the first couple of years in this strange state, being kicked from one situation to the next like a deflated soccer ball in a muddy pig pen. Life went from bad to worse, then slipped further downhill from there. I refused to go back to what many people would consider my home on the hangdown of America, despite the fact that I'm originally from upstate New York. Because although I had plenty of friends back in Fla-La-La, I basically said my goodbyes in such a way that it would make for an extremely embarrassing return in defeat. I left the nest to become a writer, to find myself, and by the gods I was going to do just that, or die trying. This was the fourth quarter of my life, so I said fuck it and let the Hail Mary fly while keeping a loaded handgun under my pillow, just in case. At first, I mainly wrote short stories and usually pecked a couple thousand words per day. Living out of the old cop car for the first 6 months, there was plenty of time at night to scribble in the back seat, which kept my mind off the cold. I took whatever handyman or security jobs I could find and fixed furnaces throughout my first winter in order to keep myself fed. Eventually, a handful of writing gigs came my way that brought a little extra scratch. My modest readership, who I've always referred to as the Loyal Three, was small but active. I wanted to write for comics as well, so I teamed up with various artists and put my first few stories into production. Working with so many artists at that level was a lot like herding cats, so I cycled through the lineup until standouts revealed themselves. After that bouncy ball was finally rolling, I was able to attract more pencils. At one point, I had as many as 8 comics in early stages of development. About that time, I passed the 200-plus short story mark and was writing monthly for my freelance clients, who all seemed happy with me at the time. Although my life and relationships have always been the soupiest of shit, writing has been on an upward trajectory since I pecked my first sentence with the intention of posting it. Sure, I've hit many, many bumps in the road. As a matter of fact, almost all the artists I've worked with have quit or were let go at some point. Things went on like that for some time until an author I met made an off-color comment that a real writer would be completing novels. That was news to me. Of course, he touched one of my overly sensitive nerves, so I began writing Unkillable Joe the very next day. Loud blast beats from the speakers of a disrespectful roommate shook the walls of a 10x10 cell-like room I had overpaid for, while I furiously jabbed at the keyboard. I was determined to conjure a great tale from the depths of my inner ass, and wasn't about to let something silly, like an unhappy living situation, stand in my way. I had no idea how to craft a story of this scope, but I figured since I could knock out shorts like nobody's business, then writing an entire book would just be more of the same. Now, I know that's the difference between bench pressing 300 pounds and wrestling a 300-pound bear. I had no idea what I wanted the book to be about, but I knew it needed to tackle issues of self-loathing while keeping the main story a short, punchy read that would entertain the reader along the way. I thought it should be self-aware, and I felt drawn to the idea of telling the tale from the narrative. As my swarm of haters had grown by this point, I felt Unkillable Joe should also speak for them, and by the end, I wanted to come to grips with all the aspects of myself I've always disliked. As a man who's lived with one foot in and one foot out, it was important that I finally shook it all about. Sorry, I'm impulsive. My point to this scattered rant was that I was 35 years old before I finally found my thing. But it wasn't for lack of searching. 3 decades of bullshit to finally get to a point where I could have a measure of peace. I served a full sentence before I finally got to the stage where I could wake up each day without the aid of an alarm clock. Before I wanted to live the healthy life, to prolong it. Not for any other reason than to accrue as much time possible, so I could chase this sexy dragon as far as she was willing to let me. That being said, I'm still introverted and abrasive. Most still consider me to be too harsh, and I've yet to master the idea of love for another human being. In my defense, I can say this. I dearly love my life, and every second is a chance to create new worlds I'm giddy to explore. To me, the disappointment of childhood and my many failures as a young adult have all been justified, since they are now the key ingredients to this fantastic stew I can't stop eating. So, if you're floating along in space, powered by nothing but your own farts, as I was, then you need to understand the opportunities are out there for you. Before you swallow those pills, or pull that trigger, or kick that stool, or whatever the kids are doing these days, you not only owe it to yourself, but to the people you could someday touch if you only pursued one thing with 1,000% of your willpower and effort. Before you leave, hunt something ridiculous down. Make it your everyday life. Make it your business. Make it your identity. Become the thing you want. Your favorite thing. Make a splash. Get mean. Refuse to give in. Pound on the door of success until your hands are so bloody the universe has no choice but to open it out of revulsion. Earn your happiness. Make your story interesting. Fight for it like you've never fought for anything else before. Maybe you haven't. Try it. Time moves fast, so there's no point in rushing things. If that elusive goal is at last captured, you can ride the wake of enlightenment right past death and be granted the only true form of immortality. The old legends are being taken by time, so we need new ones. Since you've nearly given up already, what do you have to lose? It's all borrowed time at this point anyway. Perfect conditions for an experiment. One last Hail Mary to greatness. The more difficult the journey, the sweeter the air on the other side. Trust me on that. Whatever you might take away from me or my writing, it should be this. Don't give up. Ever. And that's it. That's my foreword. Wow. Very emotional. V. Whew. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. That was the foreword of my book, Unkillable Joe, which you can find on Amazon right now. Make sure you've subscribed to the
Mighty Pen Podcast
here on YouTube. Mash the like button. Let me know what you thought about the intro. We're going to be putting up chapters probably weekly. So as I continue the story, feel free to comment on the story and participate. Other than that, stick around because we'll be back with Chapter 1, Intro to Stupidity on the Mighty Pen Podcast.
The Mighty Pen Podcast.